I love that in the UDL community, we are open to hearing the critiques. What I would say is that to anyone who is um, thinking about how to build a universally designed learning environment, that we have to be attentive to what the critiques are. So here's the thing with the framework. The multiple means of representation, multiple means of engagement, and multiple means of action and expression, when you are implementing and when you are designing, we have to know that there can be flaws, that there can be implicit bias, that we can take the framework and turn it into something that it was never intended to be. It is very important to listen to these voices of critique, to hear them out, and to think about what the barriers are to truly building freedom in the classroom. So when we think about, in my book, I talk about building expressways to success and putting the learner in the driver's seat. That means that my biases and my power are laid to the side in order to value the learner and they pick up what is best for them. But when we hear the critiques, when we hear that UDL could be a tool that oppresses learners, we have to be attentive to that. We have to make sure that our design is bringing about the results that we are designing for. And if it's not, then we go back to the table. We come together as a community, and no one should be implementing UDL in isolation. And so that keeps the bias or the negative implications from being the reality all the time. When we keep coming back together, when we see, okay, I failed. What is this feedback teaching me? What is it telling me? How can I grow? And then flip it on its head and say, what is it teaching my students? What is it telling them? And how is it causing them to grow, or how is it being a barrier? If we are not conscious of that lens, then we fall. And that's with culturally responsive teaching, that's with universal design for learning, that's with trauma informed. The moment we become an expert on someone outside of ourselves, is the moment that we stop universally designing. And so it's very easy on the outside to look at a framework on paper and say that it has limitations, but actually, the framework has to be implemented to say whether it can move people forward or not. We have to implement, we have to try, we have to design, we have to keep coming to the table, and we have to keep having the conversation. Um, I love the fact that in the UDL community, we can take a look at the framework and say, here's areas where I personally implement well, and this is how I know. Here's the outcomes. Here's the feedback from students. Here's the products that they give. And here's areas that I struggle with, because it is three principles that have massive implications. You never arrive at, Katie Novak says, you never arrive at UDL utopia. We're always learning. We're always growing. We're always striving. And as we teach people this framework, as we teach them to evaluate the outcomes, we have to keep bringing them back to, does this work for your learners? What options are you giving? Are your options limiting their capability to shine and grow? Or is it teaching them, putting them in the driver's seat so that they can get to the destination that they've chosen and they're not pigeonholed to the destination of your choosing? Learners can handle the conversation. Their families can handle the conversation. And in a truly universally designed learning environment, the conversation is ongoing. And the destination is chosen by the learner and their families, and we partner with them for that. So, as we think about what UDL will transition into, what it looks like in the future, we think about how do we make sure that all practitioners have the tools they need to be able to have these conversations, to lean into the uncomfortableness of the conversation. And when there's conflict, how do we navigate those areas? It's all about honor. And when we honor the learners, their families, and as a community come together and say, how do we co-create this environment so that we all can learn together? That means there's going to be some give and take, some ebb and flow, some you need this to learn. I need this to learn. There are times where that comes in direct conflict with one another. How do we navigate that space? That's the same thing that we have to do as educators, as policymakers, as practitioners, as leaders. Keep having the conversation, lean into the conflict and not away from it, and listen to voices that are seemingly opposing or against, but help it to inform how you reform and get better at the practice.